A scattering of dust and rocks tumbled off the cliff. Tiff staggered backwards, her feet scrambling for solid ground. As she grappled for a boulder, her eyes followed the rock's slow-motion descent until they disappeared into the valley below. Gulping a breath of mountain air, Tiff pressed her back against the cliff face, a half-empty urn clutched to her chest. "Well, buddy," Tiff said, "how about we finish up here and then we find our way out of this mess?" She glanced sideways at Gus, then back to the sheer drop a few feet in front of her. It plunged hundreds of feet and ended in an indistinct mess of rock and tree. Gus lolled his tongue, its pinkness glowing amid the dreariness surrounding them. Bracing her legs, Tiff held the urn out and tilted it into the wind. Ashes floated from the container and danced on the breeze until they vanished into the mountain landscape. Gus whined softly. A single tear carved a line through the dusty film on Tiff's cheek. As she stared into the gray sky, a wet nose nudged her leg, and her boot's grip shifted on the uneven shelf. "Gus!" Tiff screeched as her feet slid on loose scree. The urn tumbled from her fingers and bounced off the rock ledge, somersaulted through the air, and vaulted off a rock 20 feet below. Tiff landed on her bottom and slid towards the edge. Her fingernails scraped the ground as she grasped for anything solid, and she dug her heels into the rocks. She slid to a stop inches from the precipice. "Damn it, Gus," Tiff said, her heart a drum, as her hands and heels pressed into the rocks.
So hello everyone, my name is Sarah Edmonds. I am the editor-in-chief of For Page and Scream magazine. I'm here today with Laura Frost, author of August 5th, that we had the honor of publishing in our second issue. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, just to get us started, could you tell us a little bit about the story about August 5th?
It's about a girl and her dog, and they are on a mountain. And the reason they went up to the mountaintop is to scatter some ashes, but they lost their route, and she finds herself in a predicament as the sun starts to set, and she knows she's going to lose light before she can get herself off the mountain.
Great. It's a great story for anyone who hasn't read it. It's so heartfelt and so emotional. I love it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, what inspired it? It is a very emotional, it comes off as very, very personal. I'm curious if there's any personal inspiration there. What was your...
Yes, there is a personal attachment to it. The story actually was inspired by an experience my husband had. We used to live in the Rocky Mountains, and he was a police officer there, and he had a police dog named Gus, who is every bit the Gus that you meet in the story. And on their days off, they would hike the mountains. And one particular hiking day, they found themselves in a tricky spot. They were cliffed out, very low on water, and they realized that the smartest thing to do was to call in assistance from their friend who was, works in the park service and did helicopter rescues. So with his experience, I had the inspiration to write the story to introduce the world to Gus, who is a wonderful dog, and, give it a female perspective. And then I also wanted to introduce her scattering ashes to just bring the emotion to a little bit deeper of a level as to why she's up on that mountain.
Absolutely. I think it works so well. All of the elements you brought to that story, they work so, so well. So you talked about bringing in the elements. What was your writing process like? How did you approach it on a technical level?
Basically first I wrote the story as my husband had told it to me. And then I sat back and thought, okay, let's have this as a female. And so I just kind of changed it around to, I thought, what if I was in that position? How would I feel? What would I do? I know who Gus is because he lived with our family. And, how would I react to this crazy hyper dog on the mountain with me in this predicament? And it just sort of, as the story developed and as I went through revisions and edits, the scattering of the ashes just kind of came out of nowhere, and it tied in really nice. And there is, near the end of the story, there is a romantic element, and it doesn't matter if I'm writing a novel or a short story. I always seem to have a little bit of a romantic element near the end or speckled throughout. So that's where that one came from.
I love that. I'm a sucker for romance, so I understand the impulse to add that in for sure, for sure. Um, so a broader version of that question, what kind of drew you to writing in general? What led you here?
Well, I've always enjoyed writing. Even as a kid, I'd write short stories and poetry. I went to young writers conferences, and but most of my work I just kept to myself. I just for the joy of writing. But it was about 7 years ago that I dove deeply into writing, and again, it was an experience because of my husband. Back when he was a police officer, he was involved in an incident that was life-threatening, and everything turned out okay, thank goodness. But it really made me ask different questions. You know, what if things had turned out differently? What if he did not come home at the end of that shift? And the more questions I asked myself, the more thoughts and emotions started spiraling inside of me. And as a way to deal with that, my mind created a fictional character who had lost her husband and how she dealt with it and what she did for her children and her life story from that point forward. And that story built up so much inside of me that I got to the point where I needed to relieve the pressure. So I sat down at my computer and I started writing, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and I ended up with 280,000 words. It's a monstrosity. It's but it released a lot. It got a lot out of me. And not only was it a therapeutic experience, but I fell in love with novel writing. And I'm now on my fourth novel and numerous short stories, and I'm not looking back.
That's amazing. It's such a feat to write four novels. That is such a feat. So first of all, congratulations, because that's a
Thank
lot. A
you.
lot of writing, a lot of work to put in. Um, how do you make time for that? Are you a full-time writer? Are you other jobs? Like, how do you fit
It
that in?
it is tricky to fit it in. I don't have a traditional 9 to 5 kind of job. My main job is running my household. I have 3 teenagers and they keep me very busy. I
Yeah,
spend a lot of the time preparing food for them.
that's a
So
full-time
basically,
job.
it really is. So between, making sure they're fed and run to all their activities and just holding down the fort, basically, I will do my writing here and there when I can. I wrote my second novel completely in the dance studio foyer, and I'm now spending most of my fourth novel now is being written in a coffee shop just down the street from the dance studio. So, whenever I can get a moment to sit down with my laptop, I'll get some writing done.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Do your kids inspire your writing? You seem to take a lot of inspiration from your husband. How about your children?
I do. I'm working on a short story right now that was inspired by my daughter. I'm not going to say too much about it because I'm keeping tight-lipped until it's done.
Mhm.
But yeah, an experience that she had, I wanted to adapt into a story, and so I interviewed her, and I'm excited to see where this story ends up in the world because I think it has a lot of intensity and a lot of excitement attached to it.
That's awesome. That sounds so great. You'll definitely have to keep us updated when it's out in the world. I
I
want
will do
to
that.
read it, definitely. Do you feel like you have any themes that kind of carry through your writing?
I do. I write from an emotional basis. When I'm starting to write a story, whether it's a short story or a novel, I approach it from an emotional point. So I do find I have a lot of tension, um, a lot of emotion, not always positive emotion, but angst seems to drive a lot of what I do. And I do find a lot of psychological stuff happening, especially in my novels, mental health related, almost almost touching on psychological thriller aspects. So those are a lot of the themes that you'll see running through a lot of my stories. And perseverance. No matter what life is throwing at you, just dig deep and do what you need to do to get through.
Also, great advice for giving us all the little sound bites. Do you have any authors or creators who inspire you that you draw inspiration from?
There's not any one particular author or creator who inspires me. I read um, quite a wide range, and both nonfiction and fiction. And, there are authors that I've really enjoyed their work, but I don't focus solely on, I have to read everything they've ever written
Yeah.
and that's it. I like to read contemporary works and things that are getting buzz in the media and stuff, see what's out there, see what's new and fresh. So yeah, nobody in particular that has inspired me.
That's cool. Honestly, I feel like that's a good way of going about it with reading commercial fiction and getting inspiration. What's hot? What's good to write about now?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Um, Great. So, turning a little bit to a different question, as someone who is fairly new to the writer Twitter scheme, I happened to find your Twitter profile, and you have quite a following on there. You have quite a large social media presence. It's super impressive. I do not know how to get there. Um, but I feel like that's a very big thing for writers and in the writing community now is having that social media presence to promote your work. I was just wondering, how do you manage engagement? How has that impacted your interaction, I guess, in your marketing of your work?
It is pretty crazy. I never expected to have a following of this size. I remember back in the day when I had, I thought $5,000 or 5,000 followers was insurmountable, but here I am, close to 28,000. And the writing community on Twitter and out in the world is so fantastic and so supportive. And so Twitter has been wonderful in inspiring me, helping me through rejections, which is, quite the norm in this industry, supporting other writers, and then, just ideas. We'll have conversations about the craft, and so it's been a really positive experience to be on there, and it can be fun as well. I'm known for my dad jokes that I throw out every now and then. So yeah, it has been an important part of my writing journey, both from the personal side, meeting other writers and readers, and also from a professional aspect, because it really does help promote my work and get my work out into the world.
Definitely. That's great to hear that it's been a good experience. I've always been very intimidated by social media. I'm like, I don't want to interact with people. I don't want to make people mad. Always been my perspective. So that's wonderful to hear that you've had like such a positive experience with it. Um, and speaking of putting your work out there, do you have any work that you would like to share with us? I mean, we obviously know your wonderful story, August 5th, but I'm sure that you obviously have four other novels. So what other work would you like to share with us if you like to give insight?
Absolutely. My most recently published short story is called Ripples. It was published in a hard copy collection through Polar Expressions Publishing, and that is available on my website. I have other stories on my website, including a story about Gus, the dog behind the stories, the real life dog. And my novels are not yet published. I met a lot of great agents and other people in the industry at conferences and garnered a lot of excitement about my novels, but I'm not sure what route my novels will take to publication at this point. I know they will get there. And, in time, you'll see them on the shelves. As for right now, it's my short stories that are, what's getting out in the world. And I do have a story titled The Woods that will be published in July.
Ooh, cool. You'll have to send us the link so that we can check it out and link it
I
here.
will do that. Thank you.
Definitely, definitely. Um, Also with the novels too, once they're out, whenever that happens, send us the links.
For sure.
If you could give any advice to writers, young writers, existing writers, experienced writers, any writer out there, what piece of advice would you give?
Oh, that is a really big question.
I know I'm hitting you with this one. It wasn't on the
Yeah.
little sheet.
I would have to say that remember why you started writing. And when the doubt kicks in and the imposter syndrome kicks in, which it's going to happen, and when you get rejections from, your short story submissions or from queries or, trolls who, might not say the most nice thing about your writing piece, just go back to why you started writing. Why the joy that you felt when you started writing, and focus on that, and do it for you, and it'll go from there, and you will find your audience, and yeah, basically just go back to your why.
That's great advice. Fantastic advice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
But yeah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us here.
You're welcome. It was nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.